The Battle of the Trident was still talked about by old knights and drunk lords in taverns. It was the day Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, the man who had stolen Lyanna Stark, was killed by Robert Baratheon with one powerful blow of his warhammer. His chest was crushed, and the ruby-studded armor he wore shattered into the river, scattering gems into the water. But not everything was lost. In that moment of chaos, as Robert raised his arms in victory, most people didn't notice a young northern squire stumbling through the muddy battlefield. Covered in blood, barely 15, the boy had followed his father, Lord Rickard Stark's bannerman, all the way from Winterfell. His name was Robb Stark. Robb wasn't supposed to be there. His father had left him at Riverrun with the Tullys, saying he was too young for war. But Robb had sneaked away, riding for 2 days to catch up. He had always heard stories of the Targaryens, of dragons and kings and madmen. But today he had seen real death. Dead men, broken swords, torn banners. The smell of blood was everywhere, and then he saw it. Half buried in the mud, still clutched in Rhaegar's hand, was a sword. It was no ordinary sword. The hilt was silver and shaped like a dragon's wing. The blade was dark as smoke, but shimmered with a strange light when the sun hit it. It didn't look like any northern steel. It looked ancient, magical. Robb didn't know why he picked it up. Maybe it was the way it seemed to call to him, whispering with a quiet heat in his palm. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe deep down he felt he had some right to it. After all, Rhaegar had taken his aunt. His father had died for this war. Maybe this was something fate had left behind for him. He tugged it free from the cold fingers of the dead prince. No one noticed. The soldiers were too busy looting, cheering, or crying. Robb wrapped the sword in a torn cloak and tied it to his back. He didn't tell anyone. That night Robb sat alone near the edge of camp. The sword lay beside him, glowing faintly under the moonlight. He had tried holding it again, and for a moment he felt strange, like he wasn't alone in his mind. Like the sword remembered things, fire, wings, screaming. A voice spoke behind him. "Where did you get that?" Robb turned, startled. A man stood in the dark. He was old, wearing maester robes, but his eyes were sharp like a hawk's. He introduced himself as Maester Qyburn, a healer from the south. He had seen Robb pick up the sword, but said nothing till now. "That blade is not common steel," Qyburn said. "It's Valyrian. Some say it belonged to Enar the Cruel, others to a prince who rode dragons before the doom. Rhaegar called it Blackfire." Robb frowned. Blackfire? I thought that sword was lost. Maybe it was never lost. Maybe Rhaegar found it and now you have it. But know this, boy. That sword carries history and curses. Many who carried it thought they were kings. Robb didn't answer. He looked at the sword, feeling the weight of what it meant. He wasn't a king. He was a Stark of Winterfell. But something had changed. Something deep. Since he touched it, his dreams had shifted. He saw fire and snow, wolves walking beside dragons, and a woman with silver hair crying in the dark. He tried to forget. He returned to Riverrun, hiding the sword among his things. His uncle Edmure asked him where he had been, and Robb just said, "I got lost." But as the years passed and Robert sat on the Iron Throne, Robb grew. He trained harder. He fought stronger. He was still the quiet, honorable boy people knew, but he had a fire inside now. The sword stayed hidden in Winterfell's crypts, away from eyes, but never far from Robb's mind. Then, one day, ravens came. King Robert was dead. Lord Eddard Stark was arrested for treason. War was coming, and Robb knew. It was time to take up the sword again. Robb stood at the gates of Winterfell, his breath cold in the evening air. The raven's message was still clenched in his fist, though he had read it a dozen times. His father was a prisoner in King's Landing. The Lannisters had betrayed them. War was no longer a whisper in the wind. It was a fire catching fast. Behind him, the great hall was filled with voices. Lords from the north had gathered, pledging swords and banners to House Stark. They looked to Robb now. Only 17, but taller than most men, with a sharpness in his grey eyes that reminded them of Ned Stark in his younger days. But there was something else, too. Something none of them could name. That night, when the castle slept and even the direwolves rested, Robb went down into the crypts. The torches flickered as he passed the stone kings of old, their eyes forever watching. He walked to a corner no one visited, where an old chest sat behind his grandfather's tomb. He opened it slowly. There it was, the sword, Blackfire. He hadn't touched it in over a year. But now, as he pulled it from the cloth, the blade felt warm in his hand. Not just warm, alive. The ripples in the Valyrian steel shimmered like smoke under moonlight. His fingers wrapped around the hilt like they belonged there. And in his head came the whisper again. Blood calls to blood. He shook his head, trying to dismiss the voice. Maybe it was just nerves or his mind playing tricks. But as he raised the sword, a faint red glow pulsed along the blade. It was like the sword knew war had come again. The next morning, Grey Wind growled when he saw the sword. Not in fear, more like respect. The direwolf circled him, ears raised, tail stiff, then licked Robb's hand. That was all the approval Robb needed. When he entered the war hall carrying the blade, the lords fell silent. "That's no northern steel," said Great Janumber, squinting. "Looks like dragon glass frozen into metal," whispered Lady Mormont. "Where did you get it, my lord?" asked Rose Bolton, his eyes narrowing with curiosity. Robb didn't lie, but he didn't tell the full truth either. "It was taken from the battlefield at the Trident. Prince Rhaegar's. I've kept it hidden until now," they murmured among themselves. "A Targaryen sword? That blade had spilled rivers of blood in the south, and now it was in the hands of the son of the Warden of the North." "It doesn't matter who forged it," Robb said, his voice cold and sharp. "What matters is that it cuts down Lannisters the same way." That shut them up. They marched within 2 days. Robb's banner flew high, a grey direwolf on white. But beside it lords noticed something new, a strange crimson dragon banner flying beneath the Stark sigil. Only Robb knew why. He had seen it in a dream, a wolf with dragon wings, howling over a burning kingdom. He didn't know what it meant yet, but it made his heart race. As they moved south, word of the sword travelled faster than their army. Some called it a trick. Others said Robb had stolen Rhaegar's ghost. But one name began to spread, whispered around campfires and inns, the wolf with the dragon's blade. Robb heard it once from a hedge knight, who didn't know he was talking to the real Robb. The man spoke like it was a legend already. They say the boy carries the sword of kings, forged in dragon fire. That his eyes turn silver when he fights. That he's no true Stark, but something older. Something born of ice and fire. Robb said nothing. But later, as he sat alone sharpening the blade, he caught his reflection in the steel. For a second, just a flicker. His eyes didn't look grey. They looked silver. The banners of the north snapped in the wind as Robb's host crossed the Green Fork. Over 20,000 men followed the young wolf now, marching not just for justice, but for vengeance. Word had come. Lord Eddard Stark had been declared a traitor, and Queen Cersei held him captive. There were even whispers that the Lannisters meant to kill him, but there were whispers too about Robb. Men who had once doubted him now rode beside him with sharpened steel and silent respect. They'd seen the sword, they'd heard the stories, and some had seen more, like the time at the inn by the Ruby Ford, when 3 Lannister scouts attacked them at night. Robb had fought them with Blackfire in one hand, and nothing but rage in his heart. The sword had seemed to drink the fire from the torches. Its edge cut through steel like paper, and when it struck the last man, something strange happened. The body burst into flame for a moment, as if the sword had pulled fire from the man's soul. No one spoke of it openly, but men started to light fewer torches near Robb. They feared the blade, even as they followed it. Their first real battle came at the Whispering Wood. Jaime Lannister's forces had split from the main host, chasing after Robb's uncle Sir Edmure. It was a trap, but not for the Starks. Night fell heavy over the woods. The trees whispered like ghosts as Robb and his men crept into place. The plan was simple: surround Jaime's vanguard and strike when they least expected. But Robb felt it again, the pull of the sword. Like it wanted blood. Like it was hungry, grey wind moved ahead without a sound, vanishing into the mist. Robb followed, blade drawn. The other commanders stayed behind, trusting him more than they should have. He wasn't just their lord now. He was becoming something else, something darker, something ancient. He found Jaime Lannister near the stream. The Kingslayer sat on his horse, laughing with his men, unaware he was walking into a trap. Robb could have waited, but the sword burned in his grip. He charged, steel clashed. Horses screamed. The woods came alive with shouting. Robb's northern men burst from the shadows like wolves, tearing through the surprised Lannister lines. Arrows flew, blood sprayed. The smell of fear filled the night. And then Robb met Jaime face to face. The Kingslayer grinned as he turned his horse. The young wolf himself. I expected a boy, not a ghost. Robb didn't speak. He just raised Blackfire. Jaime swung first, fast and smooth. Robb blocked it with a twist of the wrist. Sparks flew. Then Robb struck back. The Valyrian blade moved like water, fast, silent, deadly. Jaime's eyes widened as the edge nearly took off his head. They traded blows, but something was wrong. Jaime was one of the best swordsmen in the Seven Kingdoms, but his arm began to shake. His strikes grew sloppy. Sweat poured from his brow. What is that sword? Jaime hissed, stepping back. Robb didn't answer. He advanced, pressing forward. The sword pulsed in his hand now, like a heartbeat. For a moment, Jaime dropped his blade, just a moment, and Robb's blade came down, but he didn't kill him. The flat of the blade knocked Jaime unconscious. The battle ended soon after. The Lannisters routed. Jaime was taken alive. Robb stood over the field, blood on his face, the blade humming low in his hand. Men around him cheered. They shouted his name. "The young wolf! The king in the north!" But Robb didn't smile. He looked at his sword and saw the blood on it, burning, not just red, glowing, like wildfire trapped in steel. He wiped it on his cloak, but the glow remained, fading slowly. That night, Robb didn't sleep. He dreamt of a great black dragon flying over the Red Keep, burning everything. And below it stood a man, half wolf, half dragon, holding Blackfire aloft as the world burned around him. When he woke, grey wind was pacing outside his tent. The direwolf stared at him with glowing yellow eyes, and then howled. It was not a sound of victory, it was a warning. The riverlands burned behind them, but the banners of the north flew high. Robb Stark rode at the head of the host, with Jaime Lannister in chains and Blackfire at his side. Word of his victory at the Whispering Wood had already raced ahead of them. When they reached Riverrun, the Tully men hailed him as a hero. But behind every cheer, behind every toast, Robb could feel it, the weight of expectation, and the silent fear that followed the sword. At the gates, his mother met him. Catelyn Stark had aged in weeks. Her eyes, sharp and tired, widened when she saw her son, taller and harder than before. But it was the sword she noticed first, the dark, curved Valyrian steel across his back. Her lips parted, but she said nothing. Inside, they spoke in private. "You shouldn't have brought that thing here," she whispered, staring at the sword as if it might wake and strike her. Robb frowned. "It's a blade. Nothing more. No, it's not. I remember Rhaegar carried it into battle. They said it sang when it cut men open, that it burned without fire. That blade is cursed, Robb." He looked down at it, the steel catching no light, drinking it instead. "Then let the curse fall on our enemies," he said coldly. Catelyn's face twisted. "That's not how your father raised you," but Robb didn't answer. Because the truth was, he wasn't sure who he was becoming. Each time he held the blade, it felt more natural in his hand. His dreams had changed too. He no longer saw Winterfell's forests or wolves hunting deer. He saw dragons, always dragons, and fire. A woman with silver hair screaming in a burning room. A child covered in ash. Sometimes he even saw a man who looked just like him, but with silver hair and purple eyes, standing in front of a black throne of swords. He tried to ignore them, but then came the letter. A raven from Stannis Baratheon. It arrived at dawn, its seal broken by the time it reached Robb's hands. His mother said it had passed through many camps before reaching Riverrun. The message was short, but it shattered everything. Robert was not the rightful king. Neither are his children. Cersei's bastards were born of incest. The Iron Throne is mine by law. Your father knew the truth and paid the price. I will take the crown by fire and sword. Join me or stand against me. Stannis Baratheon, Robb read it twice. His fingers tightened around the parchment, and without knowing why, he reached for Blackfire. The moment he touched it, something flared in his mind. Not a thought, a memory that wasn't his. A flicker of a young man in golden armor, looking at a crying woman in a tower. Her name whispered in the wind. Lyanna, his heart raced. He stumbled back. What was happening to him? He told no one, not even his mother. Later that night, as he sat alone with grey wind curled beside him, a figure stepped into his tent. It was Maester Luwin, but he looked pale, almost afraid. "My lord," he said softly, "I found something in the Stark family records. Something you may want to see." He handed Robb a scroll, old, fragile, sealed with wax long faded. Robb opened it and read. It was a letter, written in Ned Stark's hand, not meant for anyone, more like a confession. "Jon Snow is not my son. He is the son of my sister Lyanna and Prince Rhaegar Targaryen. His name is Aegon. I kept him safe. I lied to everyone, even Catelyn, to protect him. If Robert ever knew the truth, he would have killed the boy." Robb stared at the words. His hands trembled, his world cracked. Jon, a Targaryen? His half-brother, his blood. The blade, Rhaegar's blade, had come to him, but the blood belonged to Jon. The sword, lying beside him, pulsed once, like it had heard the truth. Grey wind growled low, ears flat. That night Robb didn't sleep. He stared at the blade for hours. He thought of Jon, of dragons, of the throne. He remembered the voice in his dream. Blood calls to blood. And for the first time, Robb Stark, the young wolf, asked himself a dangerous question. Was this war really his to lead? Or had he simply been a keeper of a sword meant for someone else? Robb stood on the battlements of River Run, watching the mist roll over the river like smoke. The sword lay sheathed on his hip, but it felt heavier than usual, like it had learned the truth too, and now weighed him down with it. Blackfire was no longer just a weapon. It was a question, a judgment, and a reminder. Jon Snow was not a Snow. He was Aegon Targaryen, the blood of the dragon and the true heir to the Iron Throne. Robb had read the letter again and again, trying to find a lie in it. But he knew his father's handwriting. He knew the kind of man Lord Eddard Stark was. He would never write such a thing unless it was true. And if it was true, then everything Robb was fighting for, revenge, justice, the North, all of it was sitting on a broken foundation. He hadn't told anyone. Not his mother, not his bannerman, not even Theon, who had once been like a brother. This truth was too big, too sharp. It could slice the world open if mishandled. That night the dreams returned. He stood in a burning field, ash raining from the sky like snow. Blackfire was in his hand, glowing brighter than ever, its heat searing through his bones. In front of him was a great wall of fire, and in the flames he saw faces, Jon's, Lyanna's, Rhaegar's, even Daenerys Targaryen, though he had never seen her before, weeping over the corpses of dragons. Behind him stood two shadows, one in wolf's skin, the other in silver armor. They whispered at him in a language he didn't know, but somehow still understood. "You are the bridge." Not the king, not the flame, the bridge. He woke, gasping. The fire in the hearth had gone cold, but Blackfire glowed faintly on the table. It was changing him. He had tried to deny it, but it was happening slowly. His dreams, his thoughts, his rage. He snapped at his bannermen now, even those who had fought bravely. He felt colder toward his mother. And when Jaime Lannister spat insults from the dungeon, Robb had once stood for hours, sword in hand, thinking about walking down and ending him himself. The only one who could calm him now was Grey Wind, who never left his side. Then came word from the east. A raven arrived from the Free Cities, from Pentos to be exact. The letter was written in fine Valyrian script and bore the sigil of House Targaryen, three-headed dragon, red on black. Robb read it alone. To the one who holds Blackfire, I dreamed of you, fire and snow. Wolf and wing, the sword is not meant to stay in the north. Blood must answer blood. The dragon must rise, or the world will drown in darkness. Come to me, Daenerys Targaryen. He dropped the letter. How? How did she know? No one outside the north should even know he carried Rhaegar's sword, unless the sword itself was calling out, like a beacon, like a fire in the dark. He had never feared steel before, but this was something else. This was history reshaping itself. This was destiny. Catelyn entered the room unannounced. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep. She saw the open letter on the table and the sword beside it. You should destroy it, she said quietly. Robb didn't look at her. It's not that simple. It is, she said, her voice sharp now. That blade is twisting you, I see it. You don't even look like my son anymore when you hold it. Then maybe your son is dead, he said. The words spilling out before he could stop them. Silence. Catelyn stared at him, heartbreak in her eyes. Robb stood, guilt biting through the haze. I didn't mean, but she turned and walked out. Silent. He was losing himself. He gripped the hilt of the sword and felt its heat rise in response. That night, he did something mad. He rode out alone into the woods, far from camp. Grey Wind followed without question. At a frozen pond, Robb drew Blackfire and looked into his reflection. His eyes again, not grey, silver, glowing faintly. He shouted and hurled the sword into the water. It sank slowly, vanishing into the icy black. He waited, chest heaving, breath frosting. Grey Wind whined. And then the water began to bubble. Steam rose. The sword floated back up, glowing red-hot, and rose from the pond like it was being lifted by invisible hands. It hovered in front of Robb, the whisper returning in his head. You can't run from blood. Not yours, not his. Robb reached out and took it again. He knew now. There was no turning back. The men began to whisper. They didn't speak openly, not yet. But fear had started to spread through Robb Stark's camp like rot in a barrel of apples. Not fear of the Lannisters, nor fear of death. No, this was fear of him. They said he no longer slept, that he walked the camps alone at night with his sword unsheathed, the blade glowing faintly red, humming like it breathed. They said when he passed, even the fires burned lower. His dire wolf Grey Wind snarled at men he used to ignore, as if sensing something in their souls that Robb now could see too. Some swore he had begun to speak in Valyrian in his sleep, a language no northern boy should know. Others claimed they saw his shadow stretch long and twisted by torchlight, as if wings were growing from his back. Robb heard none of these whispers. He had grown distant from the world outside his tent. Not out of pride, but out of necessity. The more he touched the sword, the louder the whispers in his head grew. Not voices, but memories that were not his. Battles he had never fought. Songs he had never heard. Faces that belonged to the dead. And then came the visitor. It was just past midnight when the guards found her, a cloaked figure on a pale horse, riding through the darkness like mist. They stopped her, blades drawn, but she raised a single hand and they fell into silence. She did not speak. She only asked in a voice low and foreign to see the one who carried Blackfire. Robb was awake. Of course he was. He hadn't truly slept in days. When she entered, he felt it instantly. Power. Not like a knight or lord. Something older, deeper. She pulled down her hood. She was no older than 30, with ash-blonde hair and violet eyes, not unlike the Targaryens of old. But her face was pale, almost ghostly, and her lips stained with something like red wine. I am Quaithe, she said. Of Ashai, Robb narrowed his eyes. I've heard of that place, full of shadows and liars. Also truth, she said calmly, stepping closer. Her eyes went to the sword lying beside him. And that is the past refusing to stay buried. You know this blade? Robb asked. I've dreamed of it, as have others. You think it was just a relic of Rhaegar? No, it's older than Valyria, forged in fire that did not come from dragons, but something darker, carried by men who called themselves kings and gods, and paid for it in blood. Robb felt his grip tighten on the hilt. Quaithe didn't flinch. That sword has a purpose, she continued. It awakens when a choice must be made. A prince must rise. But you, Wolf King, are not the prince. You are the storm, he frowned. What does that mean? It means your role is not to rule. It is to burn paths and open doors for the one who must. Jon, he said, the name falling from his lips like a stone. She nodded once. He is the fire reborn, the last breath of the dragon line. But you are the flame that clears the forest before him. He looked down. So I'm just a tool. No, she whispered, stepping close enough to touch the sword. But she didn't. You are the blade in the dark, the scream before the silence. Your death will mean more than your life ever could. He looked up sharply. My death? But she was already turning away. Beware the throne of swords, she said, as she walked into the darkness. It cuts all who reach for it, but it devours those who are not meant to sit upon it. When she left, the guards outside said they saw no horse, no trail, no rider at all. That night Robb did not try to sleep. He sat beside the fire, staring into it, while Blackfire lay across his lap. Still, but no longer silent. It seemed to breathe with him. And the more he stared into the flames, the more he saw. Snow not falling, burning. A wall of ice cracking under dragonfire. A blue-eyed corpse riding a dead horse. And Jon, standing alone, crowned in fire and shadow. And Robb. In the vision he stood before him, sword in hand, bleeding and smiling, because he finally understood he was not the king, he was the sacrifice. The drums of war echoed through the riverlands. Robb Stark's host had doubled in size. After his victories and the capture of Jaime Lannister, many lords who once sat silent now rallied behind him. They hailed him as the king in the north, shouting the old words with raised swords and pounding fists. The young wolf, they called him, but Robb didn't smile. He accepted the crown, yes. He said the words yes, but something inside him had already shifted. The title felt hollow. He was not marching toward a throne. He was marching toward the end of something. Maybe himself. The sword, Blackfire, had not left his side since that night in the woods. Sometimes it whispered. Sometimes it pulsed with warmth, like it knew the path before him better than he did. But more often now, it stayed quiet. Watching, waiting, Robb had not seen Quaithe again. She had vanished like a ghost, but her words lingered in his ears. You are the flame that clears the forest. Your death will mean more than your life ever could. He didn't want to believe it. But the dream said otherwise. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same image. Jon, standing before a throne made of black iron and bone, while Robb stood behind him, bleeding, broken, and smiling. As they marched toward Harrenhal, news arrived. Lord Eddard Stark had been executed. Robb was alone now. The camp was silent that night. The men drank and sang to dull their grief, but Robb walked among the tents like a shadow. Grey Wind followed at his side, ears twitching at every sound. Later, in his command tent, Robb unwrapped the sword and placed it before him on the table. His mother entered. He's gone, she said quietly, tears shining in her eyes. Your father? Robb didn't respond. Catelyn's voice broke. Say something, Robb, anything. He looked up, and for a moment she saw a stranger in her son's face. A flicker of silver in his eyes, a coldness in his voice. I buried my tears in the mud at the Trident. She recoiled, as if he had struck her. Do you think this is what your father wanted? She whispered. This coldness? This obsession with a cursed blade. He would have burned that thing the moment he saw it. He's dead, Robb said flatly. And the world is burning with or without me. Then quieter, I have to see this through. I have to finish it. Catelyn placed a trembling hand on his shoulder. Finish what, Robb? The war, the throne, or yourself? He didn't answer. That night, the dreams were stronger than ever. Robb stood in a ruined Winterfell, the sky above him dark with ash. Snow fell in thick sheets, but it was warm. Wrong. In the distance, a massive wall of ice cracked and screamed, and blue shadows marched through the night. He saw Jon again, older now, battle-worn, eyes haunted, and in Robb's hands, Blackfire burning like molten steel. He looked down and saw the wound. A sword through his chest, his own sword, as if it had turned on him. Then the voice came again, not from the sword, but from somewhere higher. There must always be a Stark in Winterfell, but not all must live to keep it. He woke with blood in his mouth. Grey Wind was growling, teeth bared, staring at the tent flap. Someone was coming. Moments later, a rider arrived from the south. Stannis Baratheon had moved. He was gathering ships. Daenerys Targaryen had landed in the east, across the narrow sea. Dragons were alive. The world was changing faster than anyone expected, and in the middle of it all stood Robb. Not a king, not a conqueror, but a boy with the sword of a dead prince and the ghost of a throne carved into his future. He looked at his war table. The battles didn't matter anymore. The Lannisters would fall. The realm would bleed. But this war was not about gold or crowns. Not anymore. It was about fire and ice, about bloodlines and buried truths, about the sword that should have gone to Jon and ended up with him instead. And now he knew why. Blackfire hadn't chosen him to rule. It had chosen him to burn, to blaze like a torch in the darkness before the real king stepped into the light. He strapped the sword to his back and stepped out into the night. "Call the banners," he said to his captains. "We march at dawn." "Where to, my lord?" Unasked, Robb stared east. To destiny. The storm had broken across the King's Road by the time Robb Stark reached the ruins of Maidenpool. His army, once 20,000 strong, was now a ghost of itself, thinned by battle, betrayal, and fear. The march had been long, and the whispers had only grown. Some said Robb no longer bled. Others said Blackfire fed on the souls of those he struck down. But the most terrifying rumor was the simplest, that the young wolf was no longer a Stark at all. They weren't completely wrong. Robb no longer dreamed of Winterfell, the godswood, the snow, the warmth of home. Those memories had been swallowed by fire and shadow. Every night he dreamed now of Jon, standing in a circle of flame, sword in hand, cloaked in sorrow and destiny. He had not seen his brother since the rebellion. Jon still held the wall, still wore black, still believed he was a bastard with no place in the world. That would change. At Maidenpool, a raven found Robb in the dead of night. Not from Winterfell, not from the wall. This one came from Dragonstone, written in a smooth, commanding hand. "He is coming. The blood must meet. The wolf must fall before the dragon rises. The blade will choose." Dee didn't need to guess who Dee was. Daenerys Targaryen. Robb stared at the words, long after the ink had dried. They didn't anger him. They didn't confuse him. They only confirmed what he had already begun to accept. This was never about vengeance. This was about balance, a reckoning. He rode out alone the next morning, just him and Grey Wind, toward the edge of the godswood, where the old high heart trees stood crooked and ancient. A figure waited there, hooded, armored in black and silver. When Robb dismounted, Grey Wind didn't growl. He bowed his head. The figure removed his hood. Jon Snow, older, leaner, but the same eyes, Stark eyes. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Jon spoke first. "I got your message." "I never sent one," Robb said. Jon nodded slowly. "And yet here we are." They sat beneath the trees, where old kings had dreamed and died, and for a while they were only brothers. They didn't speak of the war, not of kings or dragons, not of thrones or swords, just ghosts. Ghosts of their father, of Winterfell, of the past they both wanted to hold on to, but couldn't. And then Robb unsheathed the sword, Blackfire. It shimmered under the sunlight, but this time it sang, a low, quiet song. Like sorrow in steel. Jon didn't flinch. "She told me," Robb said. "Father, Lyanna, you." Jon's jaw tightened. "I never wanted it." "That doesn't matter." Robb looked at the blade. "It wants you." Jon shook his head. "I'm not a king. You don't get to decide." "Neither did I." The wind howled through the trees, scattering dead leaves around their feet. Robb rose, holding the sword between them. "I thought this blade was mine, that I was meant to carry it into battle, to conquer the South, to avenge father. But now I see. I was only the bridge." Jon stood too. His hand hovered near his hilt. "And what happens now?" Robb smiled sadly. "We finish it. They fought. No rage, no hatred. Just two brothers dancing the way only blood can dance. Jon was faster. Robb was stronger, but Blackfire moved like it had a will of its own, curving, spinning, pulling Robb's hand like a whisper on the wind. Each strike echoed like thunder. Sparks flew! Trees shattered. Then Robb faltered. For just a moment his foot slid. Blackfire twisted. Jon struck, and the sword fell. Not Jon's, Robb's. Blackfire hit the ground with a hiss, steam rising as if the earth itself wept. Robb fell to one knee. Breath ragged, Jon stood over him, blade still in hand. But he didn't move. Then, slowly, Blackfire rose, on its own. It hovered in the air, spinning once, twice, then shot forward into Jon's hand. The blade glowed white-hot, then settled, at peace. Jon stared at it, stunned. Robb looked up at him, eyes glassy, lips cracked with blood. It was always yours, he whispered. I was just holding it. Until you were ready. Jon knelt beside him. You don't have to die, Robb. You can still... No, Robb said, coughing. It ends with me. The wolf burns. So the dragon may rise. Jon grabbed his brother's hand. I'm not a dragon, Robb smiled weakly. You are. Grey wind howled, and with that, Robb Stark, the boy who marched to war, the son of the North, the wolf who carried the dragon's blade, closed his eyes and was gone. Epilogue. Winterfell, 1 year later. Jon Snow, now known to many as Aegon Targaryen, stood at the head of a new army. The war was not over. The White Walkers had come, but in his hand was a sword that burned hotter than any fire. Forged in forgotten doom, once wielded by a fallen prince and passed on, by a brother who gave everything Blackfire, and this time it had truly found its king.